Hello and welcome back to the Wisdom of Odin. Today I am so excited to share with you this absolutely beautiful transition into the autumn season by discussing the deities and the beings in which we venerate as Norse pagans during this time of year. Now I will say I also have a video out there talking about the specific celebrations or holidays during this time of year, so I think the information in that video is still good, so if you want to check that out for the celebrations during this time of the year, I highly recommend it. But other than that, I'm really excited to share this day with you because, gosh, it is just insanely beautiful and just the perfect spot in this beautiful field to discuss with you the different beings in which we venerate during this time of year, which I know is so many of ours favorite time. And I am so glad for the heat to be over and for the cool breezes to return. But truly, I hope you enjoyed this video and discussion on the Norse gods of the harvest season. Now, the most obvious deities to honor during this time of year are the harvest deities. Now, the most obvious choice is, of course, Freyr, because Freyr is tied to the fields, tied to the harvest. And so Freyr is pretty unarguably a god of the harvest, a god of autumn. Now, on the other side, on the feminine side, this is when it gets a little bit more complicated. I have seen some people venerate Suna, of course, because Suna going down, going closer to winter. I've seen people also mention Freya. But I think the one that is more skipped on because we don't know a lot about her, but, you know, this could be one of her main components, is Sif. So Sif is not talked about a lot. Really, the only story of Sif historically that we have is the cutting of her hair by Loki and the forging of new hair by the dwarves. But in contemporary studies, Sif has kind of taken this role as the harvest deity because of her hair being tied to golden wheat, the golden wheats of the fields. And very recently, the Fellowship of Northern Traditions had a Sif bloat at a Pennsylvania gathering where Logan and Marion community had two scythes and then talked about the golden wheat, honoring Sif in the beginning of the harvest. So I do think Sif is a very legitimate deity to honor during this time of year. And again, just understand that this is going to be mostly a modern practice. And while there's not necessarily anything wrong with that, it's just important to note that this is stuff that we've had to reconstruct and had to evolve from the historical source material that we know from the past. Now, how would one honor a modern harvest deity? Now, this is going to be different for everybody because most of us aren't farmers anymore. Now, if you do have a garden or you are actually a farmer, I do think this would be really good to, get some of your crops, get some of the things you harvested, make something out of it, make a pie, make a cake, have a small little dinner, feast, a meal, and again, this is why we have, so many world cultures having feasts during the harvest season, because to celebrate the abundance and the good growth in the crops and just all the goodness in the world. And so I think this is a great way to connect to the harvest deities, is if you do grow even the smallest of gardens, giving some of that harvest to them. And let's just say you work in an office and you don't actually grow anything. That's perfectly okay. You work in an office to make some money. So then take some of that money to use as the middleman to go buy some food and make a dinner, make a meal, make some bread, and then give it to the harvest deities. Our definition of harvest and what we do for labor nowadays is so drastically different than the historical ancestors. And so it's just going to be different. But the way I see money and the way we earn money, it's the middleman. It's the middleman in our transactions of what we need to survive. Previously, we traded the goods that we created for food, for water, for clothing. And so it's just the nature of the game has changed, but that doesn't mean you can't honor the harvest deities in a similar-ish way to the ancestors. In case you're wondering, all illustrations and the book I'm using in this video are coming from Tales of Norse Mythology by Helen A. Gerber. This is a book I found at Barnes & Noble's. I have another edition, but I really loved the imagery of this book and just how pretty it was. So I figured I'd bring it out here to give you a little bit more visuals when I'm talking about certain deities. So these next two we're actually going to be able to talk about in tandem with one another. And that is that the majority of world cultures seem to celebrate some form of ancestral veneration during the autumn season. And that is no different than with the Scandinavian and Germanic ancestors. In fact, one of the only celebrations that we know that was venerated during the Viking Age and prior was an alpha bloat. Now, alpha bloat has a couple of different interpretations that I've seen. And the alpha bloat is either for the elves, like the actual spirits, the elves from Alfheim, or it's for the actual ancestors. But despite that, there's also the sun in the camera. I've also seen some people that venerate a Disa bloat or a Disir bloat, but typically I see most people do that in February and then in the winter months as well. But I have seen people in groups have a Disir bloat during this time of year as well. But in general, it's ancestors. The focus is ancestors, which also means there's a focus on death, because we also see that in global cultures this is the spooky season. As of course discussed in the holiday video, you have Halloween, Day of the Dead, Samhain, and all kinds of other celebrations that say, hey, the veil is thin, we can contact contact the dead, which also means the gods of death get roped into this. And so hell is a lot of go-to peoples. Now, there is a divide in the community, and I'd have an entire video on hell as well, on whether or not you venerate hell and how you do it, because as far as any information about her, it is very scarce. And we definitely really don't know if hell was venerated in any form of way in the past, even though that she was the watcher of the sick and the old. This doesn't change the fact that a lot of people choose to venerate hell during this time of year, so hell would be a good deity to look towards if you're looking for a deity to kind of contact about the dead. The only form of practice that I actually have roped into my own personal practice is giving an offering to hell in order to communicate with the ancestors. So to call out to hell saying, hey, you know, I mean, this is a call out to the fact that Odin sent Hermund, his son, down to commune with hell to speak to Balder. So using this same practice of saying, hey, hell, guardian of the dead, guardian of the sick and the old, you know, please allow me to speak with my ancestors tonight and giving an offering to her. So that's how I personally do it. But there's, of course, several different ways people do this, and just, of course, venerating and honoring hell. But as far as other gods of death, you have, of course, Odin and Freya are another go-tos. So Odin with the warriors, Freya with the warriors as well, and then Thor even with servants in some degree. So there's a lot of gods of death here that you can kind of rope into this. And I know Logan in the community is planning a gods of death float coming up for our fall celebration in Kentucky. So what I already said is probably the best advice I can give, because it's what I feel most comfortable saying. And it's that if you want to grow closer to your ancestors, giving an offering to the gods of death to allow you to speak with them, to, you know, to pay that homage and that respect, I think is a really good way to incorporate the gods of death into your harvest and autumn celebrations. Now that we've covered the gods of death sufficiently enough, we need to talk about the ancestors, which may actually be the most important component of the autumn season outside of the harvest. So I really see this duality between the harvest and death, because this is the time of year where trees begin to go to sleep. That's why we see their beauty begin to decay and then eventually sleep. And then they wake back up in the spring. And so you really have this, like, we're getting the harvest, we're getting the fruits of our labor, but also things are beginning to die and go to sleep for the winter season. So these two things come together to really form why I believe the autumn season is so powerful for all of us, because there's these two components coming together. Now, having just come back from Scotland and having actually laid inside of a burial mound, let me tell you, the ancestral powers, honoring the ancestors, and the ability of the dead to reach out to us is very much real. And so our ability to communicate with the dead is very much real as well, and giving them offerings. And again, this is something we see throughout cultures in the world, is ancestral veneration, of leaving them flowers, of leaving them gifts, of giving them food. It's something that is just innately human. So the honoring of the dead during this time of year is so important to us as a species. Ways to do this: give them offerings, lay flowers, you know, have a picture set up on your altar space or in your house, put flowers around it, decorate it, go visit gravestones, even of your ancestors weren't necessarily pagan. I'm from Kentucky. There's ancestors all over these hills buried around. Go visit one of their gravestones, wherever you're from. Lay flowers, honor them, remember them, learn from them. You know, I have so many family members that, you know, when they do pass, I'm going to continue to honor their memory, even though they're not pagan themselves, because they've taught me so much in my life. And so no matter where your family comes from, no matter what your family is now, your family's had heroes, they've had villains, they've had triumphs, they've had low points. No matter what, they got you where you're at now. So it's important to honor and remember that. And if you want to dive deeper into the idea of a pagan remembrance, you know, the idea of them feasting and drinking with us, that's why we give food, that's why we give drink, is because they are here to feast and dine with us during this time of year. So one way that we are actually doing this with the community is we're actually going to build a burial mound of some sort of, at our next gathering. We're going to dig a hole, put up some earth around it and some sticks to create a burial mound in order for people to go and leave their offerings inside of it, and then we're going to cover it with the earth. And so this is just one way that our community is taking a more modern twist on an ancient tradition of building burial mounds and burying offerings to the gods and offerings to the ancients that came before us. And that's just one of those things, you know, while it was Celtic, there's been evidence of burial mounds all across the planet, basically, and burial practices. And typically these burial practices of the pagan past were with grave goods, with offerings of pottery and alcohol and food. And so giving those things to the ancestors, burying something to them, is what we're really focusing on during our celebrations at the next gathering. And finally, we need to talk about the spirits, the other component of that alpha bloat. So the Alfar, the elves, this has so many different meanings behind it. You know, are they the elves of Lord of the Rings, these big beautiful beings, or are they these more goblin-esque creatures? And as I've discussed before in the past, I believe it's somewhere in the middle. The mythology of elves most definitely survives the best in Iceland, because there's many stories, even up till today, of the hidden people, of the elves that exist in the other world, and how they spit into your eye in order for you to be able to see them. And so the spitting into the eye to remove that invisibility they have, to thin that veil. The thinning of the veil is what we're focusing on here, is the beings that exist all around us that we can't necessarily see with our own eyes unless we've been opened up to that world that exists. The world of spirits, the world of the spirits that exist in these trees and these rocks. It's that animistic idea that everything has some component of the soul, of spirit, so that this time of year, the spirit of everything comes more to life. The spirit of this river, the spirit of that hill, the spirit of this tree, everything becomes more alive, more connected to us as the energy of death is all around us. The spirits are more prevalent. And so honoring the spirits is a really great way to connect with this time of year. And just this entire day, it just feels so much more magical and spiritual. Maybe it's because I'm not sweating to death in the heat and there's a cool breeze in the air, but I really do believe that the moment that the world starts to shift, or your area begins to shift into that autumn season, into that decaying energy, everything just becomes more active. And so feeling the spirit of wherever you're at is just easier and just more powerful and potent. And so giving offerings to the spirits, communing with the spirits, is just more magical this time of year as well. I know so many of us that just talk about how much more connected we feel to the energies, to the world, to the spirits, to the gods, to the ancestors during this time of year. So really take advantage of it. Enjoy this time of year to its fullest. Get out there, connect with your ancestors, your gods, and the spirits around you. So as we're closing out here, I just want to say thank you so much for watching this video. And if you want to share your ideas and thoughts and stories about the harvest season, please put them down below here and let me know, and let the community know how you celebrate this time of year. All of these names coming down right here, the amazing Patreon supporters that continue to support this page in order to make sure I'm able to keep coming out here and having these discussions with all of you. So if you're interested in getting your names in the credits here, please think about heading down below and supporting this channel on Patreon. Truly, this would not be possible without all these amazing people and everyone who chooses to support this channel in any way they can. So thank you all so very much. Get out there, go outside, enjoy this time of year, savor it. We all know it's the shortest time, and it just goes away so quickly. So thank you all so very much. And truly, autumn's blessings to you, and I hope your harvest is bountiful and life is great, and your winter season is just as wonderful as well. And until the hall, Skull.